Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name's Anna Rose Canzano. I'm the Exhibition and Programming Associate at the Wende. Thank you so much for joining us today for Cold War Spaces. Today's topic is Monumental Space, Public Art in Kazakhstan. And I'm very happy to welcome our guest, Timur Bekbosunov, to the program today. Timur is a Kazakh-American opera singer, performing artist, and film producer. He grew up in Almaty, Kazakhstan, which you can see in the background of his image. And the murals and mosaics there will be the subject of today's conversation. And you might recognize him from music at the Wende. He performed in December 2019 in Classical Underground Presents Between Revolutions, Human Triumph Over Tragedy in the Soviet Experiment. And in March 2020, almost exactly a year ago, was Beth Morrison Projects Presents Nueva Canción, Songs of Protest and Resistance. And that was a new music-based multimedia event created by Sandra Powers and Timur and performed by his glam rock band, Timur and the Dime Museum. And that was actually one of our very last in-person events at the museum before this shutdown. So we're very glad to welcome you back virtually today. And today's program will be about a 30-minute conversation between Timur and Joes Segal, the Wende's chief curator and director of programming. After that, we'll leave about 15 minutes for a Q&A from the audience. So please get your questions ready to put in the Q&A box during that time. As always, we appreciate everyone's questions, but please keep them short and concise, no longer than a sentence or two. And for all other comments or discussion, please use the chat box. It's always nice to see what city you're tuning in from. We already have people from all over the world in there now. So feel free to say hi in the chat. And we'll be posting the recording of this program on our Vimeo page, as well as in podcast format on our SoundCloud page afterwards. Lastly, I want to thank Susan Horwitz and Rick Feldman for generously supporting discussion series at the Wende and our virtual programs. And now I'll pass it off to Joes to get started with the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna Rose. And Timur, welcome to Cold War Spaces, but also welcome back to the Wende Museum. You gave this really memorable recital almost exactly a year ago at the Wende Museum in our series Music at the Wende, which was envisioned and is organized by Abby Schur. And it's great to have you back. And speaking about dates, I realized that it is to the day exactly 2 years ago now that Dennis Keen gave a wonderful presentation about monumental art in Almaty at the Wende Museum. I know the two of you are in close contact. So I guess henceforth we should call March the 3rd the Wende Kazakhstan Day. But it's great to have you here. And maybe as an opening question, can I ask you how you got interested in these monumental art pieces in Almaty?
Well, listen, it's such a pleasure to be here, and it's really hard to believe that here we are a year later talking and not singing for me, but it's certainly, that was also my last performance, live performance, when Timur and the Dime Museum performed at the Wende Museum. Beautiful space, we loved it. I'm always been a fan of public art, no matter what culture, no matter what country. I would be one of those people who loved noticing the little strange cultural differences that often public art kind of represents. And so that sort of happened, I think, after I came to the United States and started to pursue performing arts more seriously. You know, the more you study about it, or the more you read about it, or when you watch movies, you start to notice a lot of things. When I was a young child growing up in Kazakhstan, and the background is actually a view from my window. I took this photograph from the 8th floor of our apartment building where I live. And it's, you know, you waking up in the morning and seeing those beautiful mountains, for which Almaty is, of course, famous. So you up in Kazakhstan and you walk past those monumental art pieces everywhere. You kind of took them for granted in a sense, because you know, they're out there under the rain and snow and summer sunshine, so you don't even think about it. But you know, until you start, you know, you kind of like, you live your nest, you go into another country, and then you look back and you rediscover it and you think like, wow, it's just incredible. So that probably happened about 10 years ago. I started to pay attention to that. And a few years ago, I discovered Dennis' work, what he has been doing in Kazakhstan as well. And it's just made me realize the significance of what he was doing, something that I really, again, took for granted for many years. And so I'm very grateful to him, and glad that he had a great presentation for you as well.
Right. So can you give an explanation why it is, especially in Almaty, that we can find such unique and so many monumental artworks, even if you compare it to other Soviet cities of the same period? Almaty really stands out. And feel free to sing your answers instead of talking.
That will take all the 2 hours. It'll be in 3 acts, of course. Well, I was born in Almaty, and that's the city where is my native city. Although I traveled around Kazakhstan, and I traveled a little bit around Russia and some of the former Soviet Union countries. Almaty is a very unique place because it became that hotbed of hub of a lot of interesting personalities. So, as you know, post-war, post-Second World War, we had a tremendous creative urge to be inspired, to move away from what the Soviet Union just experienced, and the world, of course. And so first we see this like 1940s and 1960s, a shift, an influx of great creatives, scientific personalities moving into Almaty, moving into Kazakhstan, film studios, research institutes, facilities, and setting up a really nice base. Kazakhstan was kind of considered to be way out there, Almaty was so far away, the Siberian Tsarist regime would send off their people to serve sentences, right? And it was quite scary. But in Kazakhstan, World War II, it was kind of a safer place. So they would hide a lot of scientists, and then they decided to take a route there, right? Artists, writers, composers, of course. And so that's probably one of the main reasons, is that it got this really great dose of energy that allowed them to create it. And then, of course, Kazakhstan began to grow itself, and Almaty in particular was really wanted to create the city of gardens, right? And city of gardens always goes along with decoration, and every single element in Almaty was planned. If you have children's playground, right? And they would plan it with trees, and how that would go along with the playground. If you have a bus stop, right? The bus stop was designed so that it would provide shade, circulation of air coming through from the mountains, right? And moving all the fog away, as you can see that the mountains in the background again. And so it was kind of like this organic, unique way that continued all the way probably through the 80s. And I think the third reason why it was happening in Almaty is because the Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Auto Industry dedicated immense resources to planning of those things. I mean, that's public art requires vast investment. You need to have human resources, we need to have talents, and essentially funding for it. So it was just happening in a good moment for Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess the majority of these public artworks were created between the 1960s and 1980s. But it seems also that the first generation, at least, of these artists who were responsible for these works were not from Kazakhstan. And why was that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because we often, have to start somewhere, and it's a question that I asked myself, growing up in a family with a Russian mother and a Kazakh father, right? So my mother herself came from Irkutsk. That's where the roots. So in fact, her roots are coming from Poland. So her grandfather was a Polish Jew who was sent over to Irkutsk in that area. And so it's just like they know their family tree. And on the Kazakh side, of course, I don't know, because my grandfather was an orphan. So we kind of stuck. So and a lot of native indigenous population in Kazakhstan, unfortunately, in the early 20th century, was in a dire condition, and the language remained an oral language, the Kazakh native language, of course, and so I think at some point there was an effort to provide the assets of leadership that would be open to settle down in Kazakhstan, and in the name of the communist regime, of course, everything was done to build this utopian system, and allow them to develop, to nurture new talents. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we see that. On the other side, some of them were sent over to Kazakhstan because they would keep them out of trouble for political reasons. So
Yeah.
there are all those reasons. But then once they got to Almaty, everybody would just be shocked by how beautiful and green the city was. And that's the reaction that I still often hear when I meet people here in Los Angeles. And those who immigrated to United States in the 80s, in the 70s, and they happened to travel to Kazakhstan, Almaty, and they would always mention, like, oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful green city with a beautiful green bazaar, which is, by the way, side note, Richard Nixon attended when he was in a very short period when he wasn't the president, but not vice president, and he traveled to Kazakhstan. So we all also even have that bits of information. And the different cultures we're reflecting and influencing Kazakhstan. And I think, as my good friend Beysenbay Suleimanov, the Kazakh writer, said once, we have learned how to get along with Russians, and we have learned how to get along with other cultures. And so now it's this amalgam. Right. Kazakhstan is still searching for its identity, and it needs to have more, but that's, of course, another discussion.
Yeah, aren't we all searching for our identity, I would say. But there is one thing that really struck me when Dennis Keen gave his presentation at the Wende Museum, and that is that these murals, etc., are so unlike what you might expect from socialist realist art. The style is sometimes very modernist, but also the content, it's not always your typical socialist workers, etc., but lots of references to Kazakh history and culture. Maybe you can share some images so that we can get an impression.
Yeah, of course. So let me do, here we go. Well, first of all, I just wanted to also tell you that this is, what you're seeing is Kazakhstan, Almaty. I didn't take this one. This is from 1929, actually. And this is, I took the next photo because I was staying in a building nearby that I think. You see how it looks. This is what it looks now. This was taken about 4 years ago. And you see all those buildings. Some of them are older buildings, some of them are new buildings. And the public artwork would be basically placed in all of those places. You would be you would not be surprised to find them in the most unusual places, like little small pedestrian walk, an underground, a weird corner on the building. So there's couple of them that I certainly familiar with. So, one of them is dealing with the exploration of space, and yet you see like astrological science in the background. I mean, why the art was kind of pushing the envelope in terms of being able to not stay within Soviet dogma, right? But try to insert little things that did matter to people. And astrology and kind of this spiritual way of thinking always mattered to people. And on one side, on the other side, like, well, if you're a communist, why should it matter to you, right? It's all nonsense, like fairy tales. And yet here we are. We have this combination of a little bit. Here's some more. And
would you say, Timur, that the fact that Almaty is so far away from Moscow and Leningrad and other political centers actually contributed to a sense of relative freedom in artistic expression?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yes, you were able to get away with certain images, symbolism. Artists were quite smart because they would have hidden images, and they would have something in the abstract collection where they would hide an elements of their Kazakh culture, because whether they like it or not these days, I mean, we have to address the facts that the Kazakh culture and its identity was suppressed immensely. I'm talking to you with, being half Kazakh, not knowing my language, because I was encouraged not to learn it in high school, because I was told by one of my Russian peer, still it rings very highly in my head, is that we, Russian culture, taught the Kazakhs how to eat with the fork and knife, and so that type of frustration always existed. We learned how to reconcile with that. And my dad's mother, for example, she told him, you are not going to be learning Kazakh. You're going to be learning Russian, because in order to get advance in the Soviet society, you have to speak Russian. You have to embrace Russian culture. You have to embrace Russian ideology. There's a lot of great things to embrace. No one is going to say anything about it. I mean, music alone is, but at the same time, like this one of the slides you can see where we have a cultural element where woman is milking a mare. Horse milk is a national drink. So we are making sure that it's there. And there's a yurt, traditional nomadic house that would be used to, when they would go from one place to another between summer and winter. Planting of the city of Almaty, there's the trees, and then of course representing scientists, right? That we are advancing and moving from the indigenous folk culture away towards science. I do love this one of them. This is actually the wine factory, where you have three women kind of dancing in the middle of the Bakian river, and it was sparkling. So alcohol goes hand in hand with socialism.
And it is not just production, but also consumption, I see.
Exactly. There's just different examples. We see that there's some mosaics. Then sometimes we have something that is a relief carving, and we also see often that they would put the elements of what's like, if it's a high school or a school of music or university, whatever the university's main focus, like they would try to show it. So public art to me is now becoming a very unique a highly complex piece of art, right? Which has to be respected, has to be protected. But again, because it's out there, no one really cares by putting lights over it and you know, those things. And so you see this example, which I believe Dennis took one of the photos, where it's just crumbling down and no one is really taking care of it. This is another really beautiful example of relief. So a lot of Almaty sometimes has older homes, which were kind of, you know, like one floor, not very tall. It's located in the earthquake disaster zone. So we've had earthquakes before, and so they continue to, you know, to build them shorter. But you know, they had to put the AC units here over it. And then I think there's like electronic equipment there on top of it as well. Here's more. This is a beautiful school for a university for women, which would, you know, of course, encourage them to enroll in schools for the longest time. And half of it is completely gone. They just painted over it because they couldn't fix it. And you can see this old photo a little bit. You can still see what was there before and what is there now. And you can actually see the plaster and mosaics. They're just falling down on the floor, and no one would care about it, you know. So public bus stops, it's another, my personal favorite, which was so, again, when they were creating and planning them carefully, hand in hand, right? The ministry is planning with the city administration, with the City of Cultural Affairs. The idea was that we're going off the mountains into the city in one line. They wanted to do it as a one swoop, right? The waters are coming down, we're building the canals for the water to come down. And so this kind of way of integrating nature and culture, it's a strange gift that comes from a communist society. You hardly ever see that, you know, in other places. And I think the environment allowed for them to really allow us to you know, to do this. There's before restoration and there's after restoration.
That's amazing.
That Dennis, it's a thank you to Dennis, who's continuing to, you know, document everything. And he's just a master genius at uncovering the secrets of Almaty. And I'm very happy to be supporting his work.
Right. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and maybe we can go back to speaker's view now and share the presentation. And before we go to the Q&A, I want to ask you about a special project. You are not just talking about monumental art in Kazakhstan, but you are working on the production of a virtual reality experience. It's called Secrets of Comrade Bucket. And can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be, what it is, what you're aiming to do with it?
Yeah, of course. Well, when we presented our project called Nueva Canción, Songs of Protest and Resistance, it was a project that was inspired by songs of the legendary Mercedes Sosa. And the songs that she performed in her songbook repertoire. She was a voice for the voiceless. She delivered the songs about protests with such authenticity and truth and honor, and it spoke to millions and millions around the world. I, on the other hand, you know, grew up in Soviet Kazakhstan, where my grandmother, who was an amateur singer, she would teach me a lot of revolutionary songs about, you know, loving your motherland, a lot of great songs, a lot of, you know, okay songs. And I realized when I got introduced to Nueva Canción that song movement really was able to project the kind of a true authenticity of the revolution, of like those were the people songs. And yet the songs officially sanctioned by the Soviet regime just kind of fell flat, even though they're full of energy and they're upbeat and they're positive. And I just kind of like, this realization to me came that, wow, that's just been grounded in such falsehoods, really, really falsehoods. I mean, I think it affected a lot of people, that their people are still psychologically recovering. In fact, my theory is that, you know, half of former Soviet Union still hasn't accepted that. And they need to come to Jesus moment to just say, I'm sorry that this happened. And I just don't see it yet, right? And so essentially what I saw in that project and that we presented is my personal insight into growing up in Kazakhstan. And so I created this, working on this virtual immersive reality project, which is interactive. It has Comrade Bucket, who is this really this new architect, chief architect of the city of gloomy dreams. I'm still working on the name of the city, but it's not the city of Almaty. You know, it's loosely based, maybe a little bit, on the new administration. And he's there to completely demolish all the public artworks and replace them with contemporary new nothing, so that it would function. We would have a functioning society. And in opposition there's a girl named Anna who's trying to preserve them. And the audience that would be wearing, you know, VR goggles would be following Anna, trying to unlock the secrets of Comrade Bucket and help Anna preserve those artworks, whether it's by painting them in virtual reality or completing them, and in a way also learning a little bit more about public artworks. I thought like virtual reality is really a perfect medium for it. You know, obviously we're still at a very early vestiges of that technology, and you know, we only still have like, you know, 30 million users around the world, so it's not like a huge number of people, but it's very exciting new world for me, for sure. I've, you know, never produced anything for virtual reality, but I've had some experience in film producing, of course.
Right, right. Wonderful, thank you. And I think this is a great moment to move to the Q&A, and we already have a series of questions. The first is by Bruce Hollihan. He writes, in my opinion, the opportunity for cultures and diverse peoples to integrate and create hybrid arts and ways of life is an essential part of evolution. The blending of English folk music and West African folk forms nurtured rock music. Likewise in Turkey with psychedelic music in the late 60s to mid 70s. Can you give us links or examples for Kazakh fusion culture?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'll definitely can share a few links with, and maybe you can put it in a newsletter or in, it might take me a little bit to find them.
Sure. Yeah.
But we absolutely, yes. I mean, the Kazakh folk instruments, those who are familiar with the Silk Road, kind of a musical journey that Yo-Yo Ma, of course, introduced it originally to the large public. We've known about it for many years. Represents a lot of instruments that now can be combined with rock bands. And so there are several rock bands that utilize that. They use throat singing as well. I always say that throat singing is not traditional to Kazakhstan. It is now used as kind of like, oh, we're the Central Asia next to Mongolia, so kind of similar, right? So it's really more of a from that area, but nevertheless, you know, we can utilize that. Traditional Kazakh instruments were not loud instruments, right? They were not brass, because you would use materials to make what you had in the steppes in wherever you go on a horse, something that you can take on a horse. So if it's a dombra with 2 strings, right, that's an easy instrument to carry. Or if it's a kilkobus with the horse strings and you play it like this, by using your nails, and it's kind of jumps around like that. You know, it makes a sound of a wolf, right? Just yearning to escape for his fate. sounds like us in Kazakhstan. But nevertheless, yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. You just have to amplify it and make sure that those sounds would be heard, because they're very, very intimate sounds,
Right.
and it's interesting how the blend is, that some bands have been able to find, particularly Dombra, of course. That's very versatile instrument, played by both men and women. In fact, one of the most famous players was a woman too.
Right. And on that note, let me mention that next week, Friday, March 12th, we have a virtual concert with Central Asian traditional music and instruments. And we'll also have a small exhibition on our website. So please check that out. The next question is from Ricardo Zanettini, and he asks about the meaning of Alma-Ata, which was the former name of Almaty. What does it mean?
Well, there are a couple of theories, right? It's one of them. It's, I think, that the favorite and the most famous one is that it's the city of apples, the grandfather, the grandfather of apples in a sense. Ata is grandfather, or could be also like a respectable way of addressing an older person or something like that. And Alma is apple. There's actually some research that indicates that the original DNA of apple trees, wild apple trees, can be traced to the mountains of Kazakhstan, where they did grow. I think there has been some effort to bring those apples back, those trees, because I do remember climbing in the mountains a few times, hiking them, and seeing those trees growing in the wild. I don't think they're very old, but that's what essentially is, Alma-Ata. Now the pronunciation is Almaty, so it's not as Russianized, but it's beautiful, beautiful name for sure. So that's where the apples originated, guys. And I do love apples.
Right.
My favorite fruit.
Well, New York is called the Big Apple, so maybe Almaty should be called the Small Apple. Would that work?
Yeah, I mean, the small apple for sure. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like it's a little apple. Yeah, I can see it's a cute little apple.
Right, and a very authentic apple. Next question is from David Edick. A generation has passed since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Can you talk more about Kazakhstan's search for identity? What are some of the driving themes, attractions, and fears?
Well, in the 1990s, when things collapsed and seeing it completely changed, ideologies shifted, the moods at times brightens, at times completely dampened and went depressed. I think a lot of people just were on a quest trying to figure out what's happening. Some segments of population left Kazakhstan because they felt that there is a tremendous pressure in terms of the Kazakh identity policy, because they felt they're not welcome there. Another group of Russians stayed and actually embraced the learning of the language and embracing learning of the culture and figuring out how it would work. I think under the leadership of Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan was not put under an immediate mode of erasing everything was in the past and let's just build everything on top of it, right? So I would say that we avoided what happened in other countries in Uzbekistan. So it was like a way how it morphed and evolved slowly, where only now coming to the point where potentially the alphabet, the Kazakh alphabet, will be using Latin letters with additional letters from other languages like French and German. and 9 specific letters. But you know, we're at this point. So I think people are struggling with that, and some people are frustrated. I see a lot of young people that are very excited about it and are very proud to embrace that. And if I was there in Kazakhstan, if I didn't live Kazakhstan in 1995, I probably would be right out there as well, you know. And so I'm definitely a big fan of what is happening now. Unfortunately, what is happening with the public arts right now is another question. You know, we're not protecting them. We're not giving them a status, a historical status, a status of a unique art object, and there's no reconstruction happening. You know, they sell the building, and the owner of the building just tears it apart. You know, and unless Dennis goes there with his little, you know, shovel and saves it into his little cart, I mean, I don't know, how do you save them, you know? So that's why I think the mentality has to change. Just because it was built by Soviet regime, right? There were some things that were influential and formed the new Kazakh identity. It's part of its DNA now, whether, you know, you like it or not. So you just kind of have to embrace it.
Okay, thank you. I see that some people are putting questions in the chat, but that's not where I'm looking. So please put your questions under the Q&A box. I have another one here from Andrea Serna. She asks, in Kazakhstan, does graffiti have a place in what would be considered public art? Are there public spaces available for artists of younger generation to create art? That's, of course, an interesting point, because it could be a kind of grassroots continuation of the public art movement.
Yeah, I believe there are some spaces where you can do it, and graffiti, as we know it here in the Western world, right? Probably not as advanced as in Almaty in Kazakhstan, because there you can say that public art was essentially institutionalized, right? Because there were institutes dedicated to public art, and that's all what they did. Factories had departments that would be dedicated to that. So when you have broken pieces of china, you would just use it to install, you know, into your public bus stop. So I think right now, because we kind of have a mixture of an old guard and a young guard coming through in, I think, all of the levels of different ministries and administrations, you know, and so some of them are allocating funds where because I think they want to have graffiti only in certain places. They love that. They're like, okay, this is where you're going to do graffiti, this is where you're going to skate, and this is where you're going to sing, and nothing in between. And then in between, we're just going to have trees, lots of trees. And so I think there's that mentality, and you know, I understand kind of that, because certainly some of the best graffiti sometimes you see when they create it spontaneously. And I think there's an element of censorship, of course, still involved. I mean, face it, the country has been under the same regime for, I think I haven't been alive yet. No, I mean, I think I've been alive. I was alive, yeah.
Right.
No, but I mean, just to still think like, wow, we're still there. So they probably afraid that, you know, people start writing something, and then it's going to be about the president or the family or this and that, and it's like they probably better not to do this. So, you know, this is what they do. They revolutionize banking system, financial system, shopping centers, you know, whatever is trickling down to the arts, it does. But I think graffiti is you see it rare than you find it here in LA, of course. You know, it's like a beautiful place for graffitis.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a few very nice personal comments by Ray Cunningham, but we will make sure you get them as personal messages, Timur, because they are not really questions. The next question is from Susanna Altman. Hi there, a couple of years ago, the Akimat of Almaty invited me via the Goethe Institute to conduct a series of workshops and lectures for artists as well as Akimat people covering contemporary public art. It was so great, but I didn't have the impression that the interest in Soviet monumental art was very strong, sadly. Was I wrong?
Well, God bless Goethe Institute, because they do more for Almaty than any other organizations. Somehow, some of the most interesting projects that usually involve Goethe Institute in Almaty. It's kind of amazing. At one point, I thought like I'm gonna learn German so that at least I can be involved in those really cool projects. Well, I think it's maybe my guess is that a lot of things are either covered or destroyed or are just, you know, there is no, for all of those years of making the art, they don't have it cataloged. They don't have a system that allows you to say like, hey, this is, oh, let's go and see this artist. Let's go see that artist, right? Right. Because there were like maybe 3 women artists in the public art world, right? We don't have any of their presence, physical evidence of their work, because it all been demolished or potentially covered underneath the plaster. So until we have a system that allows you an easy access, and whether you're a scholar or just a general lay member of public, you like the ease of access, right? I mean, if I'm going to be messing around with something for, God forbid, 5 minutes and I can't figure out, I will most likely lose my interest and will move on to something else, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to make something like that so that, Susan, you can go back and say, wow, this is like the best show I've ever seen. Wow, this work has really been amazing. Because a lot of it is just hidden. It's somewhere in, you know, buried in the playgrounds between the buildings, and they just wouldn't. They're sort of not going to take you. They wouldn't know how to take you.
Right, and of course, Dennis Keen has done an enormous amount of.
Oh yeah. Check out Monumental Almaty. I think it's monumentalalmaty.com or something like Monumental Art or something like that. It's a tremendous resource. He's putting together a map of Almaty. It's wonderful. I mean, I've discovered things that I've never seen before, and I've lived for years and years in the city.
And he's also very active in actually defending and conserving these artworks. So he does a great job, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But sure, I mean, if they would take you just for few preserved pieces of art, because sometimes the idea is that I think it's because Kazakhstan is a new country. They want to make sure that they present the most polished material out there, right? They're not going to show you something that is kind of half crumbled, right? Because it might negatively appear for like, oh wow, you're not taking care of your art. How dare you? This looks horrible. And they'll present you just a few spots that, hey, well, this is a great preserved work. And unfortunately, those are not the most interesting because they were very primed and they were commissioned right. by the party government, and so you don't get to see that spontaneity.
Right. Final question, Timur. When can we expect Secrets of Comrade Bucket, and how can we access it?
Well, it's not ready yet. We're still working on it. And designing this is not like creating, of course, a stage play or doing something like that. So you have to do a game design plan. Then you work with a programmer, designer. Then you work with musicians, and then of course writing the whole step. So if you play video games, then that's kind of the structure where you have to do it. I can share some news that the musical stage version of this piece, outside of the VR reality, virtual reality game, my stage play is going to be called The Great Soviet Bucket, and it's also directed by Sandra Powers and produced by Beth Morrison. And that's the piece that's going to combine the music by Mercedes Sosa as well as Russian songs, Soviet songs that I grew up with. And it will be kind of a personal stories of me growing up with my grandmother, my die-hard communist grandmother, who taught me all the songs and taught me how to clean the house. So I thought it'd be a really good projects to do it, and that one is going to be out hopefully by the end of this year. We're talking with one of the big presenters here in Los Angeles, so hopefully once it's there, we'll share the news.
Perfect. And let's reconnect when that happens. I'm very much looking forward to it. Timur, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Great having you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for supporting.
Absolutely. So next week we have our next Cold War Spaces interview, this time with Ian McGregor, British publicist, and he will talk about the history of Checkpoint Charlie and the Berlin Wall. So please join me next week and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.